Thank you so much, Colin, for your time and agreeing for the interview. And I want to introduce you to my audience. This is Colin Wright. He's a evolutionary biologist, also a journalist. He's a founding editor of Realist Last Stand, and also you can add anything that I've missed because you are many things in this day and age, and please introduce yourself to my audience as well.
Yeah, so thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, you hit pretty much all of it. Yeah, evolutionary biologist. I have a publication called Reality's Last Stand that talks a lot about the sex and gender debate. That's sort of where I focus most of my attention. That's why I left academia for, sort of publishing articles disagreeing with a lot of the, I guess, gender ideology, sex denialism going on. So this is what I do now. I just try to educate the public about, I guess, sex and gender a lot of the time. And
you are
that's
one of the most prominent figures at this point, I think, who discusses gender and sex without fear. And like, speaking of which, today, like 20 minutes ago, you got banned from Twitter. What happened? Please say,
Yeah.
and I'll show
Well,
I'll show the picture later when I post the video.
yeah. Well, I guess technically I've been locked out of my account. It's not like a full suspension, banned forever. But I made a political cartoon that I attached to a article that was on my publication. That like the article was called Trans Activism and the Road We Didn't Follow or something like that. And so while reading that, while editing the piece, I sort of had this image in my head of this classic sort of moral philosophy trolley problem, which for people who don't know what that is, it's this philosophical like scenario, this hypothetical, used to sort of analyze the foundational aspects of our moral compass, I guess is how I would say it. So usually it's set up in this way where you imagine that there's a trolley speeding down a track and it's gonna head towards and run over like 5 people. But there's this switch on the side of the track that you can pull. And if you pull that switch, then the tracks will sort of shift and it will go on this other side track where there's only one person on the track. And then so the moral dilemma is like, well, do you do nothing and let the trolley just sort of kill all these 5 people, but you're out of it, your hands are clean, or do you actively go in there, flip the switch, and then your hand is directly, related to that one person dying? Like you're choosing for that person to die. And there's like a bunch of different ways that this trolley problem has been presented, since I don't even know when it was first presented. I want to think maybe in like the early 1900s or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And so I just did a new version of it while reading this piece where the trolley is speeding down a track and there's no one in the way. It just says, and the trolley is labeled people with gender dysphoria. And then the track straight ahead is just this reasonable accommodations route that is going down that way. But then off to the side, there's a trans activist or what is it? The activist isn't themselves transgender, but they're a gender activist. And they're pulling the lever, which is making the trolley go to the side track where there's 5 people on the track, but each of those people is labeled like biological reality, common sense, women's rights, all those things. So I thought it was a pretty apt cartoon because it's kind of a lot of people. Yeah, and it got almost 2,000 retweets just in a day. And so now that is apparently violence and hate speech according to Twitter. So I've appealed, and according to, I mean,
that was the reason.
Yeah, that was a reason. It violated their policy on promoting violence and hate speech against protected groups or something.
Oh my God. I've been following you for a long time since I saw you in Joe Rogan's show. So you've been actually contributing to changing my mind in terms of what was going on in woke situations. So I had sex ed and I was talking about gender a lot, or sex a lot, and they bullied me on TikTok because I was saying woman. They were like, you should say AFAB instead, assigned female at birth. I was like, I can't do that. So and they've been bullying me for many other things. So finally it clicked. I was like, this is this is crazy. Something is really wrong here. And finally, I got myself banned entirely from my account of like more than 500,000 people on TikTok because I said that men cannot get pregnant. So, so that's my short story. So, how did you become this fighting force against the pseudoscience? And like, when did you leave academia and so on? Like, what happened?
Yeah. So as long as I can remember, since I was starting to get into science when I was maybe like 10 years old, I've always been interested in science. And when I was an undergrad and a little bit right before, I used to have a blog, and I was really into evolutionary biology. And so I was debunking pseudoscience when I was first getting into science generally and evolution in particularly. But it was mainly just criticizing things like intelligent design and creationism and other sort of woo-woo things like ghosts and stuff like that. Like I was pretty critical of all those types of supernatural beliefs and pseudoscientific things. And so for me, when I was at university, when I was a grad student and a postdoc, and I had colleagues that were saying things like, "Oh, there's 5 sexes in humans," or "sex is a social construct or a spectrum." I just took those claims the same way I took other claims relating to intelligent design and ghosts and things like that. Like, oh, there's just they're wrong about this one particular thing, and I understood the biology. Let me correct them on this type of thing. But I guess I should have been more aware of the social surroundings, because the people I were criticizing before were sort of right-wing Christian evangelical types, and they didn't have a big foothold in academia. But when I started criticizing like my own colleagues for what I saw was just the same type of pseudoscience, that had a big backlash. So I for a while, this was a little before 2020, and I was sorry, this is before like 2018. I was keeping below the radar. I was trying to get jobs as a professor. I was applying for every single professor job I could in the United States and Canada. And I got really fed up because James Lindsay, Pluckrose, and Bogosian, they did a big sort of sting operation where they hoaxed a lot of these gender studies journals and published complete nonsense in them and exposed them to be frauds. Nature had published an article about why sex is a spectrum. Scientific American did the same thing. And it just sort of came to a head where I was like, this is insane. This isn't just a fringe internet community that's saying stuff that's wrong on the internet. Like, this is pretty mainstream. So I wrote an article for Quillette called The New Evolution Deniers, where I laid out my problems with the sex denialism. That kind of blew up, in a good way, but then a lot of people, my colleagues especially, thought it was, transphobic or whatever. So I thought it was really weird. That's why, because I wanted to be a scientist, because I wanted to be able to challenge certain ideas. I didn't become a scientist so I could just cower and be silent on things. So I just kept writing articles about it, what sex is, why it's not a spectrum, etc. So that pretty much lit my entire academic career on fire. But it sort of sparked a new one of science popularizing outside of it, and sort of this, criticizing the gender ideology and the sex denialism and sort of an anti, wokeism in general. That's what I kind of do right now. I criticize a lot of woke ideologies just because they all spring from the same sort of set of ideological, roots. It's this critical theory. It's this postmodern way of looking at the world that I think is leading to a lot of really bad outcomes on almost any topic that they touch.
Yeah. Do you think at this point, do you think that is it even possible to become a biologist or a professor in that field without believing in this stuff?
You can fake it. You can be
No.
quiet.
Without saying it out loud, without faking it. Just
So you have to signal to some degree that you believe it. At least because most universities now, they require like a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement that makes you say things, about sort of political ideologies about race and race relations and equity and systemic racism, all those things. So you need to write like a maximally woke DEI statement to get even, an interview at most of the big colleges, or probably most any colleges in, in the wake of the George Floyd stuff. So you do kind of have to lie, and that was a big problem with me because I wrote my own DEI statement because maybe a third of the universities required it when I was applying, and this was before George Floyd. And I sent it to some colleagues, and they said that they liked it, but that this wasn't the type of statement that would ever even approach getting me a job in the U.S. and Canada, just because I wasn't talking about systemic racism and the way that they wanted me to talk about these things, which is a very narrow sort of political lens of equity
Yeah.
and systemic racism and stuff. So it's really tough. I don't want to say it's impossible, but you're really swimming against the current if you're trying to do that, and it's already so competitive that any little hurdles in your way it can just be disastrous for your likelihood of getting a tenure track job and then getting tenure, much less.
Yeah, because anyone who speaks out, who are currently already being like in the academia, they've been threatened to be kicked out or already kicked out. Like, that's why I asked. It seems pretty impossible from outside, like looking in, that you would become anything related without lying, at least.
Yeah, if you have tenure, you can speak out. It might still like sabotage your career and your collaborations and stuff, but people with tenure, they need to speak up because they're the only ones who can right now. It's much harder to get a job in academia right now than it is to maintain one if you already have one. Like you can speak a little bit more if you're tenured and you have the job. So those people need to speak up because that's the whole point of having tenure. If you're not going to speak up when you have tenure, then tenure is wasted on you, essentially.
Yeah, like if you're not discussing ideas and you're not attacking ideas from every possible angle, then you are not a scientist, in my opinion. Sorry, you're not a scientist. You're just a memory holder. Like you're just remembering things and saying them. Like, I don't know. What happened after you started speaking out? How did they actually started canceling you? And say even things that you may think are insignificant or small or irrelevant. Because I think everything matters, because when I say to people, even in my language, or when I say stories like this, they don't believe me. Like, or they say, oh, it's just TikTok, like it's nowhere else, like it's not in real life, and so on. So please tell me, like, how did they try to cancel you exactly?
Yeah, the biggest attempt was in the wake of an article I wrote for the Wall Street Journal. It was called "The Dangerous Denial of Sex," and it sort of spelled out what sex is and why it's important, and why we can't go down that pathway of denying such a fundamental aspect of our biology. In the wake of that article, there were a lot of Twitter campaigns to sort of get me canceled and labeled as a transphobe, so people would make these long threads and they would tag in Penn State, which was the university I worked in right now, saying like, Penn State, are you aware that you have this transphobe working for you? This, are you really an inclusive campus? Are you, you're creating a unsafe environment for students on your campus, et cetera, all that stuff. I had students from my campus contact the diversity and inclusion people in my department, telling them that my article made them feel unsafe on campus. There's a big job board that anyone in my field who's an evolutionary biologist or an ecologist uses to sort of look for jobs. It's called the Eco-Evo Jobs Wiki. It's this big Google document, and you can, if you see a job that's not there, you post it, and then everyone can apply to it. And it's just a really great resource at any given moment, especially in the height of hiring season. There's over 1,000 people, ecologists, like on that board looking for it. And some people decided to just upload jobs that weren't really jobs, but they were just, the job title was something like Colin Wright is a transphobe and a race scientist. Don't hire him. And they did this several times, and it's something I'm not capable of deleting. I had to contact the people at the job board, and this thing's up for hours, and all my colleagues seen it, and I got messages from my colleagues saying that they were seeing this thing. And so they had, that was going on. There were just, a lot of my personal colleagues that I've collaborated with were denouncing me on Twitter as a transphobe. So
they had
yeah,
to do that for virtue signaling, right? So that they see
a lot of them.
safe.
Yeah, some of my colleagues messaged me and saying because we had collaborated, we had published co-authored papers on spider behavior. That's part of what I did before. And that they said that their colleagues were contacting them because they saw that we co-authored a paper together and but don't you know Colin is this crazy transphobe and what are your opinions of him? And so he had to like publicly denounce me. So I maintain to this day that I wasn't canceled because I eventually left academia on my own. Like I just quit because because I was experiencing cancel culture, and I think that they had successfully sort of ruined my reputation where it would have been very difficult for me to get a tenure track job, as opposed to if I wasn't speaking about this on Twitter, wasn't writing op-eds in big newspapers and things like that. So I think, I didn't get fired from my job, so I don't think I was canceled, but I experienced cancel culture, and I think it was very effective, if
And
that makes sense.
still, like, it's not like you would have left if the situation was not like cancel culture. Like, if you were not pushed, maybe you would not leave, right?
Oh yeah, I mean I was going all in on academia. I was applying for, hundreds of tenure track jobs, and that was my goal. That's what I wanted to do, and still at that point. And there was a time where I decided, I was just gonna lock my Twitter down and just during the hiring season and just double down on the academia stuff because, I had been doing that for 12 years at that point. That's what my career was. Did undergrad for 4 years and did grad school for five, and I was in my second year of a postdoc. And there's not a lot of other jobs in the private sector for a evolutionary behavioral ecologist. So, yeah, I mean, there weren't didn't seem like there were many options for me outside of academia. And when I left academia, I didn't have really anything lined up. My goal was I was going to try to do online fitness and nutrition coaching. That was my my plan was. Nothing glamorous about it, but I just wanted a job where I had control over my future. I didn't want, you know, my future to be in the hands of some hiring committees who would not give me a job for ideological reasons. And, I'm going to do my second and third postdoc and working my butt off just to have my application tossed in the bin every time. So, yeah, it just wasn't worth it to me. I didn't feel like I was in control. And so I wanted to take it back, even if that meant being out of academia and not, writing stuff and just doing fitness and nutrition coaching stuff. So fortunately, Quillette hired me, and they sort of saved me from that fate. But that was, it would have been worth it to me just to get out of academia and just do something that I could build for myself.
Did you not also get some kind of problems with PayPal and Etsy, or how about Patreon? Was it you or someone else? I'm not sure. I know that PayPal was about you though. What happened?
Yeah, so it was PayPal and Etsy. Those were just a few months ago. So I used Etsy to sell some merchandise, really benign stuff. Like it would just like the logo for my publication. It would just say like "Reality's Last Stand," and it had a male and a female symbol on it. Like, and then I had a political cartoon that Elon Musk tweeted before that went really viral, and so I sold that too. And then everything else was variations of just Reality's Last Stand and the male and female symbol. Nothing even about trans people that you could see on there. And they decided that they wanted to ban me for life for glorifying and promoting violence against minority groups, which is completely insane.
Yeah, what's
And
really weird is that you are actually being pretty careful in terms of like wording and how do you write stuff and say stuff, and they're not, like, in my opinion, they're not threatening in anyone's opinion who has any common sense, I think. But somehow, yeah.
yeah, I'm the least provocative person. Like there's some people online who are trying to be provocative, and like
Yeah.
I'm trying to just be like the reasonable adult in the room most of the time is kind of my internet persona. And that's just kind of how I am in general too. And then so that was unfortunate and annoying because, just have to move my store somewhere else. But what was more sort of shocking was that PayPal, which I used to give, to allow people to send me donations if they just wanted to support me. They can subscribe to my Substack, but I had an option where they could just donate directly if they just wanted to donate.
Mhm.
And PayPal also they one day I just got an email and it says you are no longer allowed to use PayPal or something like that. And it said, I'm banned for PayPal for life. They didn't give me a reason whatsoever. They said, and when I tried to appeal and ask about, why did this happen, I got a response saying that if I wanted to learn why my account was banned, I'd have to have a lawyer get a subpoena to submit to a court to find out why. Like I'd have to actually go
Wow.
this legal route, which is insane.
Wow.
So fortunately, I didn't have a whole lot of people doing direct donations, and but it could have been bad. If this was years in the future and I had come to rely on this as a source of income, they can just click one button and it's gone.
But it doesn't matter. It's just so insane in general that like without any reason they just ban you for
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, from a payment processor, which at my point, since I am an independent journalist and writer, all my income is dependent on payment processors. Like
Yeah.
fortunately, Substack uses Stripe, and they've been very pro free speech and things like that. But um, who knows if they could change in the future based on management or something, or a new policy they put in where all of a sudden what I'm doing is viewed as being hateful or something. So it's really kind of scary just to be in that position where some terms of service could change one day and some intern can just click one button and then my entire income that I'm reliant on is just immediately cut off. It's not like having an employer. I mean, you can always get fired from an employer, but then you can go work somewhere else, and
Yeah.
you can get paid that way. But if I'm 100% reliant on payment processors, so when those become politicized, oh man, it's really scary, and it's just going to keep turning the heat up.
Yeah. So another thing that you've said in one of the interviews I was watching was that you think that the wokeness and the craziness haven't peaked yet. It's not the pinnacle of it, and pendulum is not going to swing back yet. In your opinion, I'm looking at it and I'm like, isn't it a peak of craziness when I cannot say that men cannot get pregnant? First of all, in the first place, the fact that we are even debating that and saying that out loud, I know that they mean trans women with, trans men with ovaries and stuff that can get pregnant, but doesn't matter. They say out loud like men can get pregnant, right? So it's so insane to me that like how far do you think this could go? Like, I don't want to believe that this can go any farther than men cannot get pregnant.
Oh, wait for it. Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this I've been writing about this stuff for almost 5 years now, and almost every month I'm just like, it can't get any crazier. And then it gets
Okay.
crazier. So, um, you know, I do think I mean, again, I could say it again where, things are crazier than they've ever been, but that's been true literally every day for the last 5 years. Um, I think they're getting to a point where they do realize they have a little less control of the complete narrative now. Like there's more people who are willing to speak up. And so you are seeing pushback
Mm-hmm.
that what didn't exist before. Well, because before people didn't even have a firm grasp of the problem, really. They thought when I would say people are saying sex isn't real or a social construct, they were like, oh, you're talking about gender identity. Like no one's saying sex isn't real. And it's like, no, they really are.
They are.
And now
They are
people are
writing.
aware of that.
Yeah, they are writing in. Someone sent to me from one of the universities here that, which is even wilder because my country is 90% of people would say they're Christian. It's pretty religious country comparison to some other countries which this wokeness is in. But even in here, in one of the universities, they were requiring gender studies for engineering majors. Engineering.
Oh
And if you do not, like, they are presenting in a way that if you say that you don't believe in this, you are wrong. You didn't study the subject well, unless, otherwise you would know that there are five sexes or more sexes than two.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
So,
that's where we are right now. Um, I think there is like that pushback that I mentioned that's growing, and people are they are paying more of a social cost whenever they say these insane woke slogans. But we're not at the point yet where we actually do control the narrative more. That is still building. But I do think in the next couple of years, it'll get to the point where we'll actually start seeing the needle go the other way. Before, the needle was like hardcore that way, all wokeness. And now it's like there, but at some point it'll be like equal, and then we'll start pushing it back. But I don't think we're quite there yet. But
Couple of years, you said. I'm so.
I think so. I think we might reach the peak in like 2 years, maybe. I don't know. It's hard. It's a hard call.
Well, yeah, they are still. I think I'm more hopeful because for no reason, because they're clearly still calling you transphobe and hateful for just saying that sex is not a spectrum.
Yeah. No, it's completely insane. It's yeah, I mean, what we're gonna see when it gets the most insane is that's when like a lot of these woke people are gonna be basically like the animal in the cage or in the corner, and that's when they're gonna lash out, and things are gonna get like really crazy really fast.
Oh,
because it's their last ditch effort to like save themselves from the fascist takeover, whatever that they're sure
yeah.
it's happening.
But do
Yeah,
you
so
think? Sorry. Do you think that there is a possibility of it swinging way too far on the other side as well, because people are so fed up with these ideologies and wokeness that we might even end up in a worse, like some kind of other side, but also bad direction?
Yeah, I do worry about that. Although I think that, while it could swing back the opposite way too much, I think that too much in the opposite direction is still better than where we are right now, because we are just beyond too much in this current direction. It could get to the point where it swings so much where it becomes more crazy. I don't think that. I think even if there is an overcorrection, it's still a better place to be than where we are right now. That's not to say that I would justify that an overcorrection is justified. Like if I could control the meters and knobs, like I would want it to be perfectly proportional.
Of course.
That's usually not how social movements work. Like they tend to go a little too far, and I'll speak out against any instance when it does. But
same. If it goes on the other side, I would do the same too.
Yeah, and I've seen it. There was like a little meeting here in Tennessee that we were invited to. It was like a Republican meetup or something, and I don't consider myself Republican or Democrat. I'm just sort of pretty apolitical. I vote for wherever I see my values. But we went there, and it was sort of a rural Tennessee group, and so there were a lot of really conservative, very religious people, and some of them would get up there and say, like when I get elected, I'm going to ban transgenderism across the board. And it's just like, well, I don't want to ban people from being trans. Like you can't do that. And gender dysphoria is a real thing, but doesn't mean we should erase biology and all this stuff and protections for women. Like there is like a reasonable accommodations middle ground that we need to try to thread that needle. So yeah, it's gonna be a culture war that's gonna rage on for a while, going back and forth.
Were you blamed basically for directing people to children's hospital for like bullying them or whatever? What happened there?
Yeah, partially blamed. They put most of the blame on people like Chris Elston or Billboard Chris and Matt Walsh, libs of TikTok. They got most of the flack, but people did accuse me of this whole like stochastic terrorism, just because, we're pointing out the fact that doctors are using pseudoscience as a justification for performing really, amputating the breasts of young girls and what I would say is mutilating the genitals of both boys and girls based on this notion of gender identity, which I think is completely pseudoscientific. So there was a lot of these videos that came out of the Boston Children's Hospital that were talking about gender affirming hysterectomies and
before 18,
stuff on their
right?
website.
Before 18 years.
For the so it's interesting because they claimed that things like vaginoplasties and hysterectomies weren't only performed, well, originally on their website it said 17 for vaginoplasties. And then after the backlash, they changed their website to say 18, and then they started claiming that like, oh, we never said, this is misinformation, even though like, well, no, because 3 days ago it said 17, and that's what we were complaining about. Anyway, so there's a huge, big media blow up about that, but they're more angry with us for pointing out the fact that they're offering certain surgeries to minors, saying that we're responsible for this hate campaign against the Boston Children's Hospital. They claim that people are calling them up and harassing them and threatening violence, which they actually have provided zero evidence for. But even if they have been doing that, they deserve some outrage. I don't condone any actual calls to violence or threats, things like that. But there's a good way to stop. Yeah, there's a good way to stop all this hate campaign, and that's to like just stop operating on children. Like, that's way worse and more dangerous than people giving a phone call and angrily calling up a children's hospital. Like, they want us to be quiet and not point out the fact of what's happening, rather than just owning what's happening. They do support it. They should just support it if they do, rather than trying to say that we're wrong somehow for pointing this out. So it's really this crazy inversion of reality and who's doing the most harm here. I think it's
aren't they really good at that? Like turning the perspective as if you are the one harming.
Yeah, they're good at turning themselves into the victims every single time. It's really fascinating and amazing to watch actually play out in real time.
Yeah. Do you think what do you think? How would we look at the current situation from the future? Like in terms of mutilating children's genitals and giving them hormones when they don't need to, and so on.
I truly think we're going to look back at it as the same way a lot of people look back at like a lot of Nazi medicine, and a lot of the terrible medical scandals like performing lobotomies on people or different types of eugenics, things like that. Those things at the time they were happening were approved by a lot of medical organizations, and people went along with it. You had people getting sterilized in the United States, and people having all sort of crazy operations that were based on the science at the time, so to speak. We look back and we can see the pseudoscience they were actually based on, and how this is a horrific thing that went through. And oh my God, how do we prevent something like this from happening? We like to pretend like we're actually beyond that now, and we've learned from these past mistakes. But we really haven't.
I think people really forget. Opposite.
Yeah. We're so much more enlightened now. This could never happen again. Oh, it not only can happen again, it's happening now, and it's way worse than lobotomies have ever been, because it's still going. It's targeting children. The children are overwhelmingly, either will grow up to be gay or lesbian, so like the LGBT minority groups, and the overwhelming majority of them are, or a very high percentage of them, have mental illness and have autism as well. So this is like a medical experiment on like gender non-conforming autistic kids for the most part. I just cannot imagine a future where that's looked back on and not just like, oh boy, what did we do? So
it's really
call it out as much as possible.
Yeah. How deep do you think lies are into the pseudoscience of gender ideology? Like, when did it start? What do you think? Also, is it something that you're uncomfortable speaking about at this point, or no?
Well, I think I'm comfortable talking about like, when did the pseudoscience emerge? Is that what you're?
How deep are the lies? What do you think?
Oh, they're incredibly deep. They started not in the sciences though. They were like sort of baking in the humanities departments and these, fields like gender studies and queer theory. A lot of these things have their roots, I think, in the 60s. But they sort of went through some weird adaptations, in like the 90s and stuff, that have sort of created what they are now. The lies go down. I first started pushing back when they started attacking the biology of sex, because I remember in sort of the early 2010s, I was asked by a lot of my progressive friends and to distinguish between somebody's sex and somebody's gender identity. These were two different things. Your sex is how we, when you refer to as male or female, that describes your sex. But when we talk about whether someone's a man or a woman, that is referring to their gender identity. So you can be a male but a woman, or a female and a man. And at first I was like, well, this is weird, but we have these two sets of words. Why not? Okay, I'll agree to this way to speak about things. But in my mind, it was like, as long as we have this wall between the physical characteristics of your body and sort of the mental identity aspects of things, like, it still sounds weird, but I was like, okay to go along with it. And then we kind of, some degree, happily lived in that space for a few seconds before they just moved the goalpost. And now people are saying that, now they're identifying as male or female, not just man or woman. And then, oh, by the way, sex isn't even a real thing. It's a social construct. And, just like gender identity. And so it was really when that came up, that's when I decided to push back, because, I understand the biology behind it and what male and female are. So it really starts with like that whole denying biology, that they're social constructs. And then that's used to then tell people that, if you identify as a male or female, even though if you have, genitals that are of the opposite sex, well, that's okay, because some people are intersex, and therefore that shows that sex is a spectrum or a social construct. So no one can actually tell you that you're wrong if you identify as a male or female, because the lines are arbitrarily drawn anyway, so anyone can just identify where they want to. Then they've attached these labels, male and female, onto these social roles and expectations. So they're saying that if you're, male, but you like the rules, the social roles and stereotypes of a female, then you have a female gender identity, and so on. This causes people to sort of have this, psychotic break in their mind, this dissociate their minds from their bodies in a way. And then there's this added layer of pseudoscience where then they want to medically transition your body, even though sex is a social construct. So is gender identity. We have to like modify your physical body to bring your body in alignment with your mind.
Nothing makes sense, literally.
Yeah,
Nothing that they are pushing.
Yeah, I mean, it's on one hand they'll say one thing, and then they'll speak out the other side of their mouth saying the completely opposite.
Like, if it's not binary, how are you changing your gender, like sex? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. They don't really have any good response. They constantly equivocate between sex and gender, and sex assigned at birth and gender assigned at birth. Any way to further their ideology and to confuse people into just being like, okay, just don't attack me, just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And that's how they've gotten so far, because and then they've, all this insanity is sort of shrouded in this rainbow flag that no one wants to criticize, because that's associated with progressive and goodness and love and all that stuff. And so they've really just done a great job of shielding complete insanity from reasonable criticism. Yeah, it's amazing how they've actually been able to achieve that.
Yeah. So when I started to notice that there were some flaws and significant flaws in their logic, I started digging up on where this even started from. And I was like, oh, okay, it was somewhere in between Kinsey and the John Money and people like that who detached gender from sex in the first place. And it, in my opinion, it doesn't even make sense, because why do we even need this detached thing from our sex, which is based on just characters? Like, I might be more masculine female and someone might be more feminine female. I might like cars and not hair salons. And that doesn't make me any other gender. It just makes me masculine female. So I think in the first place, it's pseudoscience from that deep. And that's like, as you said, around 60s, 50s. What can counter this? How can we just speak about this more, I guess? How can we stop this nonsense and pseudoscience? What do you think?
We have to recalibrate people's minds, because I think that they've seized on a lot of these cultural symbols, such as, you know, the rainbow flag, for instance, and all that type of stuff, all that symbology that we associated with the gay rights movement that was really good. Well, I view a lot of the trans rights movement now is basically they've captured these gay rights organizations and all the gay rights messaging, and they're using that language, that same language that everyone has sort of in their minds associated with good things, and you know, these bigots are against conversion therapy and all this stuff, and but they've twisted it in a way that it brings in this pseudoscience of gender into it. You know, there's no ideology associated with being homosexual. It's just understand that my attraction to the same sex is just as strong as yours to the opposite sex. Most people can sort of resonate with that. They might not personally feel it, but they can at least intellectually understand that people might be attracted to the same sex. With the gender stuff, it is a complete ideology that we're asked to buy into, you know, social constructionism. So I'm just trying to point out that where the difference lies, where you know, you don't need to deny biology in order to, you know, be compassionate towards people who have gender dysphoria. We just need to keep pointing out that just because this is the LGBT community or something, or just because they have these certain flags that we associate with being good, you know, you need to actually evaluate their claims on a case-by-case basis. So that's what I've been involved trying to do, trying to educate people on biology and things like that. But it is really just recalibrating people's minds to certain symbols that they've become accustomed to being associated with being really good. That's really hard to do. It's a lot easier for people just to sort of have this little mind association thing with like rainbow flag, good. People who are against rainbow flag, bad.
That's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, and so it's, even though when people like me who were very much for rainbow flag, you know, version 1, not so much against version 2, but the reasons really matter. But it's just so easy for them to spin the story as like the same bigots, they're at it again. So I mean, people are wising up to that distinction, but it takes time, especially because it's political. Their friends are tied up in it. You know, it's hard to say to come out against this stuff when all your friends are going to disown you. I mean, that happened to me. I've more than half my friends have won nothing to do with me. Some friends I even had since kindergarten just completely disowned me overnight because I published an article about this stuff. So it's really tough for people to do. It's the social pressure, and also depending on their job. I mean, they can have financial costs to it. So there's a lot of things that are keeping people from speaking out against this stuff. So
yeah,
I'm trying to.
Yeah. Sorry, I lived in Canada, and the situation was much worse there. Like, I have friends who work in corporations, and they do want to say something, but they cannot, even on their casual social media apps, they cannot say anything. They're afraid.
People are getting better, but it's still, there's a lot of people who are, I mean, understandably afraid to post on social media because they'll still come after you.
Okay, and one last thing, sorry. Is there anything that you are still afraid to say out loud? You're like almost sure that that's the way it is, but you cannot say? You don't have to say the thing. It's just, do you still have?
No, actually, I mean, I've sort of carved a place where I'm more or less uncancelable. You know, I mean, I'm temporarily suspended on Twitter, but I mean, no, I didn't. The thing is, like, I don't really think I have any extreme views about really anything. I think I really just say the most like common sense things. Like, there's only two sexes. It matters in some situations. Treat everyone like individuals. Like, these are the things
X
that I
and
say.
Y and XX chromosomes. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess these are controversial, but they really like shouldn't be, and I'm shocked that they are. Yeah, I don't think there's nothing that I don't say on Twitter that I want to say. So I mean, I might word things differently because of Twitter's rules and things like that, but no, I really don't think I'm really self-censoring on anything.
Amazing. Okay, I'm glad. Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun. Have a good one.
Thank you too.